One of the largest, untapped opportunities in carbon markets comes down to a simple but necessary activity: how people cook. For more than 2 billion people, cooking requires burning wood or charcoal in a smoky fire or inefficient stove, harming the climate, forests, and people's health. The solution is clean cooking. Clean stoves and fuels, supported by carbon markets, can deliver immediate and measurable climate benefits while improving access to sustainable energy for millions of people. Cookstove projects have the potential to reduce over 1.5 gigatons of carbon emissions by 2030. That's the same as the combined annual emissions of global aviation and shipping. For corporate buyers, high-quality cookstove credits offer a smart, strategic investment. They deliver immediate and measurable emissions reductions, strong co-benefits aligned with corporate sustainability objectives, credibility from advanced carbon methodologies, and alignment with key frameworks like Article 6 of the Paris Agreement and CORSIA. Simply put, investing in high-quality cookstove credits is good business. The Clean Cooking Alliance is partnering with climate, energy, and financial organizations to help investors and project developers access the resources they need to speed up and scale up high-quality cookstove markets. Supporting clean cooking is more than a strong financial investment in climate action. It's a commitment to healthier communities and a more sustainable world.
Welcome everyone to the third panel of our Carbon Markets Day, Beyond the Smoke, Rebuilding Trust in Cookstove Credits. We have an exciting speaker lineup who will be exploring the benefits and challenges of ensuring the true impact of clean cooking credits. Without further ado, I would like to invite our distinguished speakers and moderator onto the stage, please.
Testing. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. My name is Vicki. I am from the Ministry of Trade and Industry, Singapore, and I'm extremely glad to be here with all of you. Cookstove credits have had their fair share of flack lately, and it's not without reason, of course. Questions around additionality, permanence, and over-crediting have really plagued the industry. But equally important, of course, is how do we still ensure that there's high integrity and that we ensure that the co-benefits remain, because we cannot refute that cookstoves, moving towards clean cookstoves for the communities, does have extremely important benefits. And we are very fortunate today to have with us here a diverse panel that reflects the clean cooking ecosystem. Jillene, as Chief of Staff and Chief of External Affairs Official, Clean Cooking Alliance. Ephraim, Director of the Department of Green Economy and Climate Change, Ministry of Green Economy and the Environment of Zambia. Remo, Carbon Technical Analyst, ICVCM. Catarina, Business Development and Sustainability Lead of UpEnergy. And Caroline, Director of Corporate Affairs, BURN. So they are project developers, governments, and standard setters, and each tackling this balance from different angles. And each of them will come in with very interesting insights from their point of view and how cookstove credits can still continue to drive meaningful climate action. So I wanted to start the conversation with the context, the case for cookstoves. So to Jillene and Catarina, what are cookstove credits? Why are they important? And what are some of the overlooked benefits of cookstove credits? Thank you.
Sure. So hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting us. So I'll keep it simple. For those of you who are not familiar, one carbon credit equivals 1 ton of CO2 that we either remove, avoid, or reduce from emitting. That goes obviously through the appropriate channels of standardization. So in the clean cooking space, what that looks like is if someone is, for example, cooking with wood and you shift them for electrical cooking, the delta difference of what they used to emit before with then after with electricity, that delta is what carbon credits are, which obviously then we can sell onto. I'll let you cover the benefits.
Sorry, is this on? Yes, excellent. Yeah, so beyond the obvious carbon benefits of transitioning to clean cooking fuels and using cleaner appliances, clean cooking touches almost every sustainable development goal and has incredible benefits to health, preserving landscapes, reducing wood fuel use, protecting forests, for women's time savings and economic empowerment. So clean cooking is actually where we see the environmental and social return alongside the carbon benefits that actually makes this space so exciting and makes it one of the most cost-effective and immediate solutions we have to benefit people and planet.
Thank you. Ephraim, from a government perspective, and for you as someone who's as part of the community as well, what does Zambia see the value of clean cooking transition? And what has some of your national policies have been to incentivize clean cooking? Thanks.
Thank you very much for inviting us. I think as the two colleagues have indicated, clean cooking has a lot of benefits beyond just environmental benefits. We have the social and the economic issues. But from the government's perspective, particularly as a regulator, it's about ensuring that you are delivering credible emission reductions. And the key to that is having a very effective monitoring system so that you are able to confirm that what the beneficiaries are claiming as utilization of the stove is actually happening. And now there are digital platforms and systems that would allow you get notifications whenever the Cookstove is in use. And I think that's one, from the government's perspective, that we think is very important to employ, because then you have no questions about, because people can use public relations. They will have multiple stoves. They'll be using it whenever you are going to monitor. But if you have an independent way of verifying that, then that removes that question of not it being applied when you're not there.
Thank you, Ephraim. I think you've moved on to the very important question here now as well, which is on integrity. How do you do MRV, etc., to make it such that we continue to maintain integrity? So I'm going to move on to what has been then the key challenges to ensuring that Cookstove credits continue to be robust and deliver the impact they promise. So from a project developer standpoint, Catarina and Caroline, how has the increased scrutiny impacted you as a project developer? And what adjustments did you need to make to these projects on the ground?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. From a project developer standpoint, I think it's clearly not in our favor to have the increased scrutiny. It has affected investment in terms of it creates a kind of a risk factor, like more risk factors for clean cookstoves, meaning now clean cookstoves are seen as high risk and we are unable to attract pre-financing, which is really the core of our business. The way our model works as Burn is that we really need to bring in investment to manufacture the stoves and then distribute them to communities. And from there, we need to put together mechanisms for proper measurements. Now, it's important for me to state that as Burn, we've always used the best mechanisms to measure, the best methodologies. We've always been high integrity. But the additional scrutiny, of course, has impacted us, and it means that we have had to do more, including going into the space of, interrogating how we can support and how we can impact more appropriate baselines. I think there is a gap there where the baseline, the lack of appropriate baselines is really impacting how the outlook on investment around cookstoves. So apart from that, I think also in the area of pricing, it has affected us because the carbon market really depends on integrity. When you cannot have proper mechanisms for measurements and provide appropriate evidence, then it impacts the pricing. And when we can't get good pricing, we can't get high value crediting, it means it impacts our overall business model, and it means we can't get enough cookstoves into households. And that is really how it's impacting us. But again, we always have use the best methodologies, and now we just have to factor in how do we respond to this scrutiny, how do we respond to ensuring that the baseline issue is resolved, so working very closely with governments to ensure that, and with partners who can support and build resourcing and capacity around that, as well as accepting lower FNRBs. I think that's something we have to speak to, which again comes down to revenue. But we feel like if we can couple those, like lower FNRBs plus appropriate baselines, we can actually have a better pricing model overall. Yeah.
I think you raised a good point about carbon financing, and ultimately, when there's no trust, there's no financing as well. So I'm going to pass the time over to Catarina.
Yeah, thank you. I think from UpEnergy perspective, we really welcome this scrutiny. I would say for us, it sort of already reinforced that we were on the right path. I mean, if we go way back, UpEnergy was a spin-off Kirk Smith's lab in UC Berkeley. So, data-driven, scientifically measures has always been in sort of how we operate. But it's true, we did see a shift in the buyers. Buyers are asking more questions, tougher questions. They now want to know about FNRB. They want to know more details around durability. So there's been this shift, I think, from number of products distributed to like what's the actual impact that these are having, which I think is fantastic. And I think this is applying pressure on all developers to be more data-driven, more transparent. And so for us, really, how we handle that is, for example, we do kitchen performance tests, and these are when you actually go on the ground and measure the fuel the households are using before and after a certain product is deployed. So, it's real-world data. We obviously investing a lot in digital MRVs, so we have our own systems in-house that sort of talk to the sort of daily monitor that you were referring to earlier. And then at the end of the day is being human-centric, right? Like we're dealing with people, so understanding their cooking needs, seasonal variations, and adapting your products so that you can meet them where they most need, I think is tremendously important. And for us, we've actually been, a little bit of bragging about it, we've been awarded A rating by B0 for the very first electrical cooking project, and I think is a reflection of taking all these things into consideration.
Thank you. I'm going to go over to Remo. I mean, for the conversation so far, we have heard that MRV, increased tech-based sort of evidence is very important. But what is the right balance between rigor and practicality? And have have they actually caused unintended barriers, you think?
Thank you very much for the invitation. So, well, from the Integrity Council perspective, so we did a multi-stakeholder working group to explore all the issues and aspects of cookstoves as a category, right? And these points were actually discussed with market participants, with standards, with experts, with academia, to actually support the assessment of the different methodologies. So our first aim was actually to gain back the trust of this category, right? It was the problem, as was said already. People has some concerns on investing on this category, unfortunately, because it is a category for sure major mitigation potential, but with exponential social and environmental co-benefits. And we look at that and address it in our decisions related to the methodologies. But beyond that, we understand that also of the rigor and conservativeness of these methodologies with the new approaches and new decisions we have taken. We also understand that applicability is something that we should be also considered. So beyond this work and our decisions, we are also investigating the implementation of a continuous improvement working programming for small projects. And how to make this balance, not just for cookstoves, but of course also for cookstoves. And also inviting people, different stakeholders from the market, to investigate how the applicability of the standards can be somehow facilitated to include small projects and then have a real potential of mitigation and a real potential of scalability.
Yes, I think that was a very important point that you made, because all these robustness of verification and it's really making it more expensive to make the projects. And so are we then making it less accessible for small project developers? So I think that's a very good point that you raised. We are moving towards greater, stricter standards For instance, ICVCM endorsed only 4 Cookstove methodologies. PAC-M also, we know that there's ongoing work to look at the rigor of these standards. And of course, there's also fragmentation. Just a few days ago, ICAO have just removed the exclusions of methodology VMR 0006 as well as the CDM methodology. And so there is also that trade-off that you mentioned. So to Remo and Jillene, how does ICVCM as well as CCA intend to respond to all these standards? Do you foresee any fragmentation, and what do you think can be done to make sure that the ecosystem converges rather than diverge?
Okay, well, this is also something related to of our work. It's actually it's not somehow avoid the fragmentation, but actually to work as a filter and as a way of the different approaches and different standards and they align to the same point, and and also to be interconnected. So as long as we have an approach that is recognized by the market participants as, okay, this is sufficient for me to be considered a high integrity credit, a high integrity project, then we actually want to promote the different approaches as long as they achieve the standard of integrity, right? And as long as it's understandable that they are interchangeable. So this is also important for us. And of course, we are following the discussion on Article 6 and developments on it. And we also understand that this interoperability and interchangeability should be present also in different carbon markets. So this is our perspective on that.
And from ours, I mean, I think this is a really critical moment in the sector. And the question isn't whether we should be raising the bar. We definitely should, and we are. It's how do we do it in a way that's workable, inclusive, and consistent. And for CCA, we've been working through what's called the Clean Cooking and Climate Consortium, or called 4C, which is a collaborative effort to bring high integrity, transparency, and quality to the clean cooking carbon market and convene the whole set of stakeholders that's needed to be able to provide that evidence base and the capacity support for national governments and stakeholders to achieve their ambitions. And out of that effort came the clear carbon methodology. Now, this is the first public good methodology designed to cover all common clean cooking transition scenarios. And it harmonizes how emissions from different cooking solutions are measured and verified. And we were really collaborative and worked across the sector to ensure that it incorporates the latest science and raises the burden of proof for accurate data inputs. It requires full data disclosure and provides transparent calculation tools so buyers and governments can actually see where those numbers are coming from. And CLEAR's approach is inherently conservative so that buyers can really be confident in the integrity of their purchases. And it's designed to adhere to the ICVCM CCP label eligibility, and right now is being reviewed by UNFCCC for use under Article 6.4, and it's the only new Cookstove methodology so far submitted for review. So in addition to CLEAR, we really worked across the sector through an effort called the Responsible Carbon Finance for Clean Cooking Initiative and developed a corresponding code of conduct. And this sets high expectations for fairness, benefit sharing, and transparency that build upon the wider efforts of ICVCM and others in the carbon market, but are explicit to clean cooking. And so I think these combined efforts really signal a moment to the market. And I feel that for the clean cooking sector, there is no collective group more dedicated to ensuring that carbon markets work and deliver credible benefits to the people that need them the most, and ensure that businesses, governments are able to actually deliver affordable solutions. So I feel very hopeful, but we need to work through these challenges that these new standards are creating for governments and enterprises alike.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Catarina and Caroline again. How has developers been adapting to these changing, stricter standards? And how are you still ensuring that your project continues to be commercially viable, even with all these changes?
Okay, I can take it first. Thank you so much. Again, let me start by saying, Burn, we've always been very integrity focused, even before the scrutiny started. But now, the way this extreme scrutiny has kind of impacted us as carbon project developers is that, of course, we have to step up. It has forced us to do more in the area of integrity. For example, it has meant that we upscale, we become more rigorous in our methods, in our measurements, in the tools that we use, in the frequency within which we're using these tools. For example, we now have leveled up to ensure that we're doing the annual household monitoring, which I think we call KPTs. From a jargon perspective, and using more tools, using more advanced tools, using them more regularly in more households is equals to more money. So it boils down to it's costing us more to run projects on the ground, and that's the reality we're facing. At the same time, as we're putting more out to actually have high integrity projects, we are attracting less money because investors are worried. They're not willing to invest more in risky projects. And right now, clean cooking is being seen as a risky area to invest in when it comes to carbon. The other thing that has happened from a policy perspective is actually becoming more difficult for us to be included in critical policy frameworks. For example, when it comes to the development of NDCs, many African countries where clean cooking is, the main agenda, many African countries are not including clean cooking in their NDCs. And that's a problem because that means we can't get corresponding adjustments. If we can't demonstrate the ability to get CAs, then it means investors cannot invest in clean cooking. So we're constantly struggling with the negotiation around that. For example, with the Kenyan carbon budget, it has been an enormous process to get clean cooking into the carbon budget. And even up to now, it's a give or take. It's always like you have to go and check again, like, is it still there? Have they reduced the percentage? Like, do we still exist, in the national carbon budget? So it's a struggle. And Kenya has done great to include it. I think Tanzania has done very well because they've actually mainstreamed it as a national priority. But all other countries, like, for example, I work closely with DRC, they hardly have consideration for it. And it's a very big factor when you talk about deforestation and afforestation efforts. And yet an entire country that is the largest carbon sink for Africa has not thought that clean cooking is critical to the conversation. So right now, it's a struggle to make sure that they include it in the NDCs, and even as they write their regulations, they actually are able to put clean cooking on the map. So that's a real struggle for us, and it's actually impacting both policy, investment, and revenues. Yeah.
Yes, I think from a commercial perspective, rigor costs money, ultimately, right? And the obvious one is that cost of abatement has gone up, and cost of abatement in very simple terms is how much it costs for you to offset or reduce 1 ton of carbon. And so, the cost of abatement has gone up. We need more time. And then operationally, you need a lot more resilience to be able to deliver all of these additional layers that you now add. So, we feel like the market is moving fast in terms of the standards. The bar is being raised. Developers are rushing to catch up. But we still see that investors and buyers are not there yet, right? And I think that's a little bit what Camilla was covering. We need buyers that get it. We need buyers to come in and be willing to co-invest, to prepay, in order for us to be able to still deliver the high standards that we need. And when that's not there, we then need to go and raise capital to cover the costs. Cost of capital, major obstacle. We're currently actually working to issue a bond with a major development financial institution, but it's a rarity, is not the norm in the space. So I think cost of capital is one that we need to really get our heads around. And then I think finally, look at it through a portfolio lens. So for us, when we have buyers come to us, one way that we sort of de-risk or try to meet them halfway is that we're looking at different geographies, different project types. And so by blending it in, you're de-risking from an investor perspective. but you're also managed to still ensure that the price is able to meet the project.
Thank you. I want to move on to Ephraim. Maybe if you could also respond very quickly to Caroline's question, comments on the NDCs and how government host countries are thinking about corresponding adjustments for clean cooking. If you have any thoughts on that from Zambia's perspective.
Yeah, first of all, it's a very important sector. Clean cooking falls under forestry, whether you call it a fall and whatever, broadly that's the sector. And in most of our countries, when you look at the emissions profile, it's one sector with the highest mitigation potential. So you can't ignore that, and the contribution is important. But what we need to do is to ensure that we have rigorous methodologies that removes any doubts that anyone would have. That's the only challenge that we have. As for inclusion in the NDCs, yeah, we just finalized reviewing and updating our NDC, and that's the challenge that you have, everyone asking whether you have included that. But as you know, the NDC is a very succinct policy document that does not include everything. So you may find that it may not appear clearly as clean cooking, but as long as the sector appears in there, then in the details, in our view, it's the implementation framework which we develop afterwards, which go into detail. So from Zambian side, forestry is a very important sector, and nature-based solutions we know are critical. We will not solve everything through just technical fixing. We need to do that to address deforestation and ensure that we can address emissions from there.
Thank you.
May I add something to the NDCs? And I think the point that you've both made is really critical. And it's exciting that 96 low and middle income countries now include clean cooking or household energy measures in their NDCs. And that number's rising all the time. And the Clean Cooking Alliance through 4C actually provides direct capacity support to governments to address clean cooking and their NDCs, to strengthen their targets. We have a lot of guidance materials for MRV systems and tracking. And so this is support that's available to countries as they seek to strengthen that. But the point is, it doesn't end at the NDC. And what we're seeing is that sort of sets the stage. But what we really need is the coordination across all of the relevant government entities, because clean cooking is owned by everyone and no one at the same time. It sits in the energy ministry, it sits in environment, it sits in forests, gender, health, and it makes it very difficult to coordinate not only strategies, but make sure that there are budget line items to support that. And so one of the ways that CCA is trying to support countries to build that capacity is through an effort called the Clean Cooking Delivery Units. And this is where we support local teams of experts that sit within the highest level of government. So right now in Kenya and Sierra Leone, where our first two delivery units are, they sit in the office of the president, and they have the mandate to support the implementation and coordination of the National Clean Cooking Strategy that stems from the NDCs, stems from now Mission 300 compacts. And these teams are dogged individuals who can continuously work across all stakeholders to make sure that policy and regulation is not falling through the cracks, that climate, energy, forest, health is all working together so that we're maximizing our access to finance and much more integrated implementation. So one of those asks is really to make sure that we as the international community can support governments in their ambition and create an enabling environment for private sector investment to come in.
Thank you. There's a lot of work that all of us need to do, from the buyers to the standards to the project developers. I wanted to go back to Ephraim on another question from a host country perspective. What is Zambia doing, or what have you done to maximize participation, to ensure that participation continues to be strong in clean cooking?
Maybe broadly what we've done is to develop a carbon market framework, which is very predictable, elaborate in terms of the steps for all projects that are submitted to us. But of course, when it comes to clean cooking, we are actually trying to help the project developers within the country to form a cooking alliance, similar to what she's saying. I think a subset of that. We interact a lot with project developers and supporting them so that they come together. We need to have some minimum standards that are across the board, because that's what would help to scale up projects in this sector. And so that is one, but also sensitization generally. When we engage stakeholders in terms of what needs to be done and all that, we involve all project developers, including those under the Cookstoves.
Thank you. I have another question that wasn't prepared for. I wanted to ask, could you share with us a personal anecdote, something that you've experienced that really drove home the point to you that clean cooking is completely necessary? If it's something you've seen on the ground, your personal experience, I'll open it up to anyone who can share.
I can go because when people ask me what I do for a living, I quite often need to have stories for them to understand it. But I always have this experience. So UpEnergy is headquartered in Uganda, even though we work in other countries. And in one of the times that I visit, I personally wanted to go and meet some of these households and have the chance to hear firsthand. And I'll never forget this young mom. She has 3 young kids, and she had just adopted electrical cooking. And I was just like sitting there, and she was like, yeah, so now I don't need to wait. I don't need to spend 5 hours to cook for my kids. I don't have to be worried about them getting burned because, we use electrical pressure cookers, so they're very safe also. And she's like, now I have time to read and do hobbies. And it's just like all of these things that, a lot of us take for granted. And I was like, damn, this is why I do what I do, so that there's more stories like that.
I can go next. Thank you so much. I think more recently, something we're getting into, inform or interrogate more at Burn is the emotional attachment to cooking. I think that's something that has never really come out. Yesterday, I just touched on it very briefly at the AFDB pavilion, and immediately they jumped and said, we want to fund that. And I was like, oh, people like this kind of stuff. So I was like, all right, that's cool. So we're realizing that there is an emotional attachment to cooking and how we cook and the tools that we use to cook, and it's actually impacting the evaluation, how rigorous that can be, because it's great to have technology, but getting people to change behavior towards your technology is where the rubber meets the road. Because part of the challenge we've had with measurement is that when you go back to do your evaluation, you find that the same stove that somebody invested in has now been put away, they're not using it. And there are specific reasons, and they will tell you that, you know what, my husband doesn't really like food, whatever is your staple, rice or ugali in our case in Kenya. My husband doesn't like it when it's cooked on an electric stove, so I have to use a regular 3-stone or wood or charcoal, whatever they've been using. So it's really, really impacting how people respond to some of these technologies and products. So we found that it makes more sense and it leads to more success when you create technology alongside culture and that emotive piece that people attach to cooking. Because, it's very, very, it's very basic, but really when a household will pick one tool over another because the food doesn't taste the same, it impacts the whole sector. So, for example, in Ethiopia, we are now, we have a partnership and we are developing the injera stove for the Ethiopian market. So it's clean cooking, but focused on the human perspective, and I thought that is now becoming a powerful story, and we're just at the verge of launching that. The engineers at Burn have worked very, very hard for months on end, and finally we have an injera stove for clean cooking, and we can continue to support people, their culture, and still get our outcomes, and I think that's really going to impact a lot of what we're talking about. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the cultural aspect that Caroline has touched on is very important. In the early stages of clean cooking, what we saw standard designed pots, just one size. But you know that at the family level, it's not everything that will be cooked in one size of pot. So understanding that people would want probably a smaller one depending on their cooking needs. But also the other aspect is cooking is a very important family time in some cultures. That's when the family get around together. So yes, we are trying to improve energy efficiency to the pot. But as far as families are concerned, it is also time to warm. They may be even roasting something under that. So taking care of all those issues is very important in designing the technology.
And I think I'll just echo, my colleagues really touched on the very immediate and personal benefits to transitioning to clean cooking. But, we're here at COP and we're grappling with enormous challenges around climate, energy sustainability, nature and biodiversity loss, food security, women's economic empowerment. And these are complex issues that every country is dealing with. And yet we're debating whether or not we should actually advance the easiest, most immediate and cost-effective solution we have to all of those challenges. There is no doubt that advancing clean cooking is complex. It's multiple fuels, multiple technologies, numerous different agencies, ministries, and regulations that need to come together. But we do have the technologies. We do understand how to get products to last mile consumers. We have endless supplies of capital and innovative financing mechanisms to draw upon. So I think we're at a point now where we cannot continue to say we care about climate change when this is the most immediate, and impactful source of black carbon intervention we have. It's 2% of global emissions. We care about women's economic empowerment when 1/4 of the world's women are dealing with this time loss and the health impacts of that. And we cannot sit here and talk about nature and biodiversity and protecting forests and planting trees when we're not addressing one of the most significant drivers of forest loss. So I think clean cooking has to be our first port of call so we can get real, tangible wins that start to unlock progress on these bigger systemic challenges.
Thank you. I completely agree with you from Singapore as a buyer's perspective. Yes, we need to put finance into the high-tech things, the CDRs and everything, but then there's also the lower-hanging fruits that we must still try to ensure that we maximize. So, Remo, what about you?
Yeah, well, I will try to complement the points of everyone and focus on the part that the clean cooking is not just about that less carbon dioxide emissions or methane. It's actually about less exposition to toxic elements that you have when you have a non-efficient burning of biomass. And in the long term, how it affects the health of the community, of the family. So you don't have the carbon monoxide emission or less carbon monoxide emission, the black carbon there, so the particulates, and this has long-term effects over the community and over the family, and it's all avoided by this kind of initiative. That's also something that should be accounted and considered.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. This is my last question. No more surprise questions. Looking ahead, so we'll end on a positive note. What is one thing on your wish list that will help you, that you think will help to scale this market responsibly? Anyone can start first. Yeah.
I'll start. I think we're at this critical moment where to rebuild trust and to scale responsibly, we have to embrace the new rules, but move beyond rulemaking and focus on the implementation of high-quality projects. And for CCA and our position in the market, that means helping countries and companies build the systems, the data, and the partnerships they need to meet those higher expectations without losing momentum. So, that trust depends on transparency, depends on collaboration, and these partnerships that bring standards, that bring data, that bring in access to carbon markets for the smaller players. Right now, only the largest companies can actually navigate this space and leverage carbon finance. So how do we make it more accessible? And we have to keep moving quickly because the national ambition is there. And I think we risk losing some of that momentum if we can't continue to show progress and make carbon finance the tool that unlocks access. And clean cooking becomes the win of the energy transition, not the sort of unfinished business.
Thank you.
I'll go in order. I was like, wow, it's only one wish? That's a tough one. I think it's a combo of, everything we've discussed on high integrity, right? So more data, more, really hone in the DMRV, but marry with the social behavior that, my colleagues have spoken at length. Understand the market you're in, adapt to it. Not one product fits all. Spend time with your customer, really understand their struggles, and propose alternatives depending on grid availability, all of these different factors. But don't just expect that one project type is going to work anywhere in the world that you go. Really understand your customer and then marry that with DMRV, so you're actually proving that the usage is there. So that's the short one.
Thank you.
I think from the regulator's perspective, maybe one wish is clarity on project boundaries. This is one headache that you face under clean cooking, of course. You need to be sure in terms of how is the distribution of the stoves, what is the geographical coverage, are there overlaps and all that. And I think from the project developers, that's one thing that would appeal, that as you do the projects, if there is clarity on project boundaries, it's good to say you distribute countrywide, but it poses serious challenges for us.
Thank you. Caroline.
Thank you. I think for me, from my own experience, from the project developer side of things, I think there's a gap when it comes to capacity building. There's a lot of struggle in Africa as a continent to for both governments and institutions to deliver on the more rigorous requirements on the integrity piece, because very few people, and I'm actually very serious about this, very few people know what is going on in carbon. Very few people. And yet we have very numerous projects. We have different types of stoves across numerous communities. And it is becoming more difficult for governments and anybody else, any stakeholder, to differentiate what is a high integrity project and what's not. It's becoming more difficult, and it's being lost in the weeds what these methodologies boil down to. And we really need to build local capacities to support this. For me, who works directly with governments on a day-to-day basis, you find that very few people within the government infrastructure, and I think you work with governments closely as well, and you will realize this, you speak to this, that very few people within the Ministry of Environment, let alone the whole government infrastructure, know the deep end of this, can actually have a proper conversation about methodology, carbon integrity, and so on. And yet these are the people we're depending on to create policies, to regulate, and to make decisions in favor of the market, to drive even, pricing and all these kind of other issues. So there is a significant problem with capacity. We need to build local capacities. We cannot depend on expatriates coming to support entire markets with their knowledge. We need to have a system, a process of passing down that knowledge, passing it across, and making sure that it's easier to apply and to implement.
And it's more sustainable.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Remo.
Yeah, no, thank you. Well, I wish actually that we can gain again the trust on this kind of, in the market in general, but also on this type of category. With the different initiatives, with the capacity building that arrives as soon as possible to implement across the different projects, the different levels of projects, and then we will see finally the financing required to flowing again where it needs.
Thank you. I'm going to open the floor. Yes.
Hi, I'm Arshit. I'm with Carbon Pulse. We had 2 updates recently. Anyone of you could comment on that? I'll just so ICAO's technically advisory body, it cleared the use of Cookstove methodologies VMR 0006 and AMS 2G. What are your thoughts on that? And recently, Gold Standard labeled 1.5 million Cookstove credits eligible for phase 1. How do you see these developments sort of impacting the Cookstove market?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I could not understand properly the question. So with the new supply, how does this impact the market, right? Well, This is something during the assessment of the methodologies that we actually we first assessed the newest methodologies, right, and have a decision on that, and then we came back to some methodologies, older versions, and see how existing projects are, that use older versions of the methodologies, how they could actually make the transition without necessarily change the methodology version, right? And we have also a decision on that. And we understand that the project developers are looking at the conditions that were applied during the decisions of the ICVCM and try and make the transition and hopefully the supply of new credits or even existing credits that were adjusted to these new conditions, they actually would become real soon, because this is also something important. So despite the criticism of their category recently, for CCP label credits, we understand there is a demand, and as soon as the demand is well somehow matched with the supply, then it creates more demand, and you have a feedback effect that okay, you gain trust again to the category, trust again on the methodology on the market, and then if you have trust and previsibility that you have also demand, the supply will come eventually with the initiatives also required to guarantee the integrity of it.
Thank you. There's a lot of questions.
Thank you so much for the informative session. I have two questions, if moderator allows me. The first one is that when we talk about especially Cookstoves, how would you define a good quality credit or a poor quality credit, and what can actually improve the quality of the credit other than the additionality? We have heard a lot about the additionality and the co-benefits, but other factors could be there to improve the quality of the credit. And secondly, specifically when you look at the Article 6 projects and the mitigation, most of the interventions are at the industrial level. This is the kind of a projects where the interventions are at the household level. Do you think it's an opportunity or it's a challenge? Thank you.
I've heard the first one, the quality of the credit. So obviously it depends also on the type of you know, actual product you were talking about, but assuming you know, there's some standards that will be across. So one is the efficiency of the stove, right? Even when we're talking electrical cooking, you know, you can have two different electrical pressure cookers that have different efficiencies. So at a product level, you obviously want to have a you know, ideally an ISO approved high efficient rate. You also want to take care about like the durability of the product, especially when we look at improved charcoal cook stoves. I cannot tell you the amount of products you see on the floor, on the ground, that will be destroyed after 1-2 months of usage, right? So the quality of the product, absolutely a high one. Then it's a lot of what we briefly discussed, which is how do you prove that the household continues to use that, right? Because when you start a carbon project, you make your assumptions in terms of usage, right? So you estimate X amount of hours, X amount of kilowatts if it's an electrical one. But then you need to prove that the usage is there. And that's where a lot of discussion around the cultural shift and the usage. So I think for me, those are the sort of two critical ones. I don't know if you...
Yeah, maybe on the last part on whether the household level and not the industry is a challenge. I think we know the importance of individual actions in contributing to climate change, and maybe this is one area where a lot of communities, individual households are contributing to addressing climate change, because cooking is done across the board. Yes, we achieve through large-scale projects at industrial level, but the involvement of communities also creates that sense of responsibility that we have a contribution to make to address climate change.
Although I think I'll add to that, in addition to the enormous opportunities for households, clean cooking, and carbon finance to support household projects, advancing institutional clean cooking, so cooking in schools, hospitals, and prisons, offers enormous opportunities to build value chains and markets using that demand as an anchor customer. So in many, many regions of Africa, you know, the largest cost to schools is energy consumption. It's firewood or charcoal that they're purchasing. It produces incredible emissions, smoke for the cooks, for the students. And so there is an opportunity to deliver clean cooking at scale through industrial clean cooking applications as well as commercial applications. We've done a lot of work with street vendors to transition them, and I think this gives you an opportunity to scale markets and provide a suite of solutions and potentially leverage and aggregate carbon projects so that you are doing larger scale and larger volumes. So I think what we're seeing now, and certainly with the CLEAR methodology that is being adopted right now for household applications, the next plan is to adapt that methodology so there's very clearly an institutional and commercial application of that methodology.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question. Maybe the gentleman at the back, could you introduce yourself first before you ask your question as well?
Hello, my name is Jibao. I'm from Iceberg. We're developing a lot of Cookstove projects in 7 African and Asia countries. My question is quite simple. When do you expect the CLEAR methodology to be finalized under Article 6.4? Thank you.
It is on the December SB agenda, so fingers crossed. We do expect a decision by the end of the year, but we also know that the UNFCCC sometimes pushes it a little long, but we're very hopeful by the end of the year.
Thank you. The lady in front of the gentleman earlier. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Introduce yourself and ask your question. Thank you.
Hi, this is Jiwon Choi from Climate Change Center, Korea. We are distributing the improved cookstoves in Ghana and Myanmar. I fully support the ongoing data-driven efforts to enhance the integrity and credibility of Cookstove project. However, some countries are now considering restrictions on the use and trading of the credits from early Cookstove projects implemented under the CDM to SDM, citing concerns that their emission reductions were overestimated. So I am wondering, panelists' thoughts on this approach. What would you advise the policymakers and stakeholders who are calling for these restrictions? Thank you.
Put you on the spot.
Well, this is also a perspective we have in the Integrity Council. So the bar of high integrity is a moving bar, right? So we already did a movement on this direction. So on our decisions, we already put as a condition more conservative emission factors for many of the variables on the Cookstove project. We also, specifically for non-renewable biomass, we actually also put in a condition of to use the most updated model available in academia, right? And that is for the decision we took by that time. So of course, so we already rose the bar to a certain level. And this kind of new data comes and new perspectives and new research arise. Of course, they say, okay, there is another problem here and there, and we are also looking at that in a continuous improvement process that we have internally in Integrity Council. So of course, this kind of stuff, we receive it as input, and discussions are going to include that and check how implementable it is in the short term, but for sure in the middle, not middle term, but for sure we incorporate it in the next decision or next discussion within the Integrity Council for every category. It's not just for Cookstove, but that is something it's also a matter of to balance what is required now and applicable and achievable, and then what is the next step. So this is something that we also, it's within our structure and way of working.
Thank you. To the lady in yellow, but if you could direct your question to a specific speaker as well, if you could.
Mr. Shitima, yeah. How did Zambia engage with local communities on this issue about this Cookstove? And how did they support local communities, especially women in rural areas? Okay? Before you talk, I will record video, okay? No problem?
Our question was around how Zambia is thinking of engaging local communities, especially women, in these solutions. Correct?
That's very up close and personal. Okay.
Well, like other project developers, the government of Zambia engages developers as stakeholders. We outline our approval processes to make it clear to them. We provide support where they have questions and queries. Our role as government is to support project development. And so where they have challenges, we still provide them with clarifications so that they get their projects cleared from our side. So it's not treated differently from other projects, but we ensure that we provide all the necessary support to project developers to have their projects approved as much as possible. As long as we can help them in terms of clarifying, we do provide that information.
Thank you. This is the last question because we're running out of time. Yes, this gentleman over here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great informative panel. Thank you for your contributions. So my question is about the recent market signal related to compliance markets. So EU has now a target amounting to 5% for international carbon credits. Looking at this, some say that there will be 7 million credits available for the European market. So it's a lot. Only with this one, it's quite a lot of opportunities here. So looking at these, maybe in the voluntary markets, we may discuss more about the Cookstove credits, but looking at the horizon, do you see more large-scale projects that can reduce carbon emissions, or should there be a more integrated approach covering large-scale projects rather than just focusing on Cookstoves? Do you see any change in this?
I'll try to answer that partly, and then I think there are other people who might add more value to the answer. I think from a policy perspective, already like clean cookstove projects are already large-scale projects. But the topic today, which is this additional scrutiny, is making them really shrink comparatively. We're being compared to renewable energy projects, we're being compared to electrification projects, large-scale infrastructure projects, compared in terms from a perspective of outcomes. We're chasing the same outcomes as in renewables, infrastructure, electrification, really standout projects. So in that space, we end up looking really small, even though we do have large-scale projects. For example, Burn, as one company, has distributed more than 6 million clean cookstoves for carbon projects. Like 6 million is not a small number, but in the context of this conversation, it becomes small, which is now what we need to fix. And I think the whole approach with the additional rigor is it's something we're responding to the best we can, but it just adds to the complexity of what you're asking, that will cookstoves be able, as independent projects, be able to deliver or kind of contribute to the market requirement at this point. So I think there are real challenges that kind of are unfair. They pit us unfairly against our competitors in the energy space.
But I think they can absolutely support very, very large-scale projects across multiple countries who have prioritized clean cooking as part of their national climate and energy plans, if we can, as Carol and others were saying, very rapidly address the capacity gaps and provide the data and support for national governments to be able to lead and create carbon market activation frameworks that really work, the policies and regulations that enable those deals to be done, and support an entrepreneurial ecosystem for enterprises to come in and provide those solutions.
Okay, we are at the end of our session. Thank you for the very enthusiastic audience here. And I would like to just also express my thanks to the panelists for all your very amazing insights. And well, we hope that we can work together to create a more robust ecosystem for clean cooking. Thank you.
Thank you to our speakers and moderator for such a wonderful discussion. I would like to invite you guys to stay on stage for a photo. Thank you.